It's absolutely wonderful to be here. I've been a big admirer of your work in your ministry from afar for a little while. It's a huge honor to be speaking with you now.
Thank you. So you obviously can't see us, but there are a group of people here, and we're excited. So the first question that I think is utterly important, just to set the foundation of this discussion, is I'm sure there are people in this room who have no idea what critical theory is, or they think that could you give us what is critical theory? Why has it become such a big deal? And what are some of the benefits and dangers of critical theory?
Yeah, thank you so much. It is a huge deal today, isn't it?
Yes.
It's only become so relatively recent. So there's a big sense, and there's a narrow sense, and it's the narrow sense that's become really controversial. So the broad sense is just ways of thinking about society that critique the way things are in view of showing a better vision of how they could be. There have been lots of those in the past 200 years. But the narrow sense of critical theory is mainly the idea today of critical race theory, which came up in the 1980s, a guy called David Bell at Harvard University pioneered this idea. And his thesis really is that racial inequalities are so deeply ingrained in US society that they can't be dismantled piece by piece. And white people are incapable of ceding power and sort of establishing equality. So something dramatic needs to happen in order to bring equality. And it's this narrow sense that's really caught the public imagination recently. And I think the reason that it's such a big deal is that it's become the sort of litmus test for the culture wars. So where you stand in relation to critical race theory puts people in boxes. You're either for it or against it, and if we know that about you, then we know where you stand in the culture wars. And so I think all sorts of baggage has been freighted into this idea of critical race theory, and it's become so hot in society recently because people are judging others on the basis of where they stand in relation to it.
So why shouldn't Christians throw it out wholesale?
For the same reason that Christians should be critical in engaging with anything in secular culture. So the model for this is what Paul does in 1 Corinthians 1 with Greek desire for wisdom and the Jewish desire for miraculous signs. And the brilliance of Paul's approach is that he does two things and they don't contradict each other. So first of all, he looks at the Greek desire for wisdom and he completely opposes the gospel to it. God has made foolish the wisdom of the world. What God has to offer is foolishness. The word of the cross is foolishness. So there's a massive antithesis between the gospel and this thing out there in culture. But he also says, and this is the brilliance of what Paul does in 1 Corinthians. He also says a couple of verses later, the foolishness of God is wiser than human wisdom. So if you really want wisdom, you Greeks, if you're serious about searching for wisdom, then I challenge you, says Paul, to come to the place where you will least think you'll ever find it, which is the foolishness of the cross. And there you will find a wisdom that will blow your countenance. It's in the fullness and richness that you never dreamed or imagined. And that's the blueprint, I think, for Christians engaging with things out there in culture. So you take that pattern and you engage with something like critical race theory. And first of all, you do what Paul does with the antithesis. You say, this is not the gospel. We can't simply try and shoehorn and squeeze the Bible into this model and pretend that we've still got biblical Christianity. And the way that justice is being searched for here is not a thoroughly biblical way. But we also then go to God and do what Paul does with wisdom and say that if we're really serious about searching for justice today, and that's what's at the heart of critical race theory, it's a desire for justice, which is a good desire.
Yeah.
We can find that utterly fulfilled in the cross, where, as John says in chapter 1, Christ comes full of grace and truth, utter justice and utter mercy joined together. So if we really want what critical race theory is striving for, we need to go to the cross to find it. So it's not a complete rejection. You're not saying everything about this is utterly wrong. We want to be 180 degrees different. But you're not saying this is wonderful and we need to remake the church in its image either. It's a discriminating way of engaging, and Paul is the blueprint.
So your book is about engaging culture. However, you don't like using the word engage. You use a different term. You often state that, or you state that trying to separate Christianity from culture is like trying to extract flour from a baked cake. Can you share with us why you feel like the term engaging culture might be empty, and why you use this term diagonalization? And what is that? And how do simpletons like me begin to start diagonalizing principles and truths?
Well, first of all, you're anything but a simpleton.
Yeah.
So let me explain it to wise people such as you. I think the danger of engagement language is it makes you think that culture is something sort of sitting quietly in the corner, waiting for you to call on it, and then you decide to engage with it. You ask it some questions, it answers politely, and it goes back and sits in the corner again where it was alone. That's not how culture works. Culture is always in your face, it's always shaping. It's like we are all part of the cultures we've grown up in. And so really what needs to happen is we need to sort of disengage from the culture that's shaping us and see it for what it is. And this is the brilliance of the book of Revelation. All this imagery and all this language about Babylon is trying to get you to see, look at the culture you're in the middle of, look at what it's like, look at what it's doing, disengage from its ideology. And I think if all we talk about is cultural engagement, we get a bit naive about the extent to which culture is already shaping us. The diagonalization idea it's not a new idea. Diagonalization is my word for it, but it's something that Christians have been doing ever since Augustine of Hippo in the city of God. It's that our culture tends to think often in terms of dichotomies. That the Bible shows beautiful harmonies, that those dichotomies rip apart. Let me just give a really quick example. So there's this wonderful idea in Genesis 1, the image of God. He was created in the image of God. And it both gives us great dignity and it humbles us. Dignity because of everything that God has made, only humans are in the image of God. But it humbles us because we're not God. We're the image. We need to see ourselves in relations. We're not the thing that's being imaged with you. And then what modern ways of thinking about human beings do is they pull apart these two principles. And on the one hand, you've just got the way of thinking of human beings today. There's all dignity and no humility, which basically puts us in the position of God. We are the ones who say, I am who I am. We are the ones who decide ourselves what's good. And on the other hand, you've got ways of thinking about human beings today that are all humility and no dignity. We're just basically machines. We're complicated machines, but we're nothing more than machines. And so what modern culture has done is it's ripped apart this beautiful harmony of the image of God. And it's set dignity up against humility. And said you've got to choose. Are you a God or are you a machine? And what the Bible is, it says, don't choose, don't fall for that choice. You have wonderful dignity, but you're also humble. You're not God, you're an image of God. And so to diagonalize modern society is to say, I'm not going to choose. I'm not going to force myself into one of your two options. I'm either a God or I'm a machine. But I'm going to show how those who are ripping apart beautiful biblical reality. And that's diagonalizing the option. So I'm not a God, I'm not a machine. I'm going to cut across that choice and show you how the image of God brings everything that the thinking that I'm a God is striving for and twisting and distorting, together with what the intuition that I'm a machine is twisting and distorting. It shows you how you shouldn't rip those apart to begin with.
Amen. You live in Australia, you're from England, you spent some time in the US, so these countries have all benefited in some way from oppression and the misuse of power. How do we pursue reconciliation and redemption on a societal and an individual level when our histories have been plagued with oppression and the misuse of power?
It's a huge question, isn't it? And a really important question. I'll try and say something in response to it.
Did you say reparations? Is that what you said?
I'm writing in that other T. I haven't started saying anything quite yet. So I'll have a go, but I don't consider myself an expert in this. So one principle that we have to start with as Christians, I think, is that we want to elaborate a distinctively Christian way of dealing with this issue. There are different modes of dealing with it in society. One is to say, oh, the past is the past, that was a different generation. It doesn't matter, let's just carry on as we are. Another is to seek only punishment today. And I think both of those are so biblical. So what are the biblical principles we bring to this? Well, God is a God of justice.
Yeah.
Nothing at the end of time will be left undealt with. All things will be brought out into the open. God is a God of absolute justice. He's also a God of mercy. And the wonder of the cross is that it brings God's justice and mercy together. I think when we look at this on sort of a national level, one attempt that there's been in the past to bring both God's justice and mercy to bear on reconciliation and redemption has been the South African experience, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission that there was in the 1990s, which was influenced by Christian thinking. And so the first plank of that was truth-telling. We must uncover and know the truth about the past. And then within that context, there was the possibility of the courts that were set up to grant amnesty, if they chose to do so, to those who told the full and unvarnished truth about what they'd done in the past. And it's interesting that out of the 6,000 or so cases that came before the court, only 849 amnesties were granted. So it wasn't some sort of just rubber stamp thing. It wasn't, here's an easy get out of jail free card. There was a rigorous process to go. And there was also an element of reparations as part of it as well. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission sought to pay reparations to those who had been disadvantaged and persecuted in the apartheid regime of South Africa. Now, that's one culturally specific example. What I love about it is that it's trying to body forth this biblical principle of justice and mercy. So there is amnesty for people who tell the truth fully, without varnishing, without knocking off any hard corners. And there's also reparations for people who've been unjustly dealt with. And I think whatever Christians bring to this question, it has to be one that seeks to embody this whole biblical truth about who God is, justice and mercy together. And I don't think there are any easy options. I don't think that you can simply take the South African model and transplant it into other contexts. But that's one attempt to do this in a way that does justice to the whole of God's character.
Amen. So basically, I just heard reparations. Amen. So there's been a lot made about the atrocities and the, I guess the devastation that the Western world has caused and Christianity has caused. However, there are a lot of thinkers, even like yourself, and you reference him in your book, Tom Holland. They talk about the blessing of Christianity. Atheist thinkers, people who aren't even Christians, are talking about the blessing of Christianity in Western society. Even to the point that the people who oftentimes criticize Christianity, that very freedom that you have to criticize is a value of Christian principles and teachings. So in some way, how could you talk about share with us some examples of maybe how the world benefits from the values and the teachings of Christianity, even though we may not recognize it?
Yeah, absolutely. But I think the first thing to say is that this is a blessing to the extent to which the West is Christian, not to the extent to which Christianity is Western. So there's nothing inherently Western about this necessarily. But it so happens that the West has been sort of steeped in Christian ideas for a long time. And so it's not a gift of the West to the world, it's a gift of Christianity to the world. Christianity is not a Western religion. So wherever Christianity takes root, these blessings will come from. Tom Holland, in his book Dominion, and Glenn Scrivener as well, who's written on this in his book The MYBLVD, talk about things like equality as being a distinctively Christian blessing. So, for example, everybody's made in the image of God. That's really unusual in ancient civilizations. Usually the king or the emperor or the pharaoh is in the image of God, nobody else was. So this democratizing the image of God. There's also, funnily enough, a democracy of sin. Everybody sins, no matter how intelligent or wealthy or privileged they are. And everybody is in equal need of God's grace. And so this fundamental equality of all human beings is a huge blessing, and has been a blessing to those societies in which Christianity has shaped how people see the world. Compassion is one Christian blessing. Freedom is another. Science, the modern science and the technology that is brought forward, and there's a mixed blessing there. To the extent that our lives are improved by modern science, that has grown up in Christian soil. And I think the wonderful thing about this is that these are not cultural values. Christianity isn't locked into a particular culture. And so these are blessings that come wherever Christianity takes root in the world. And therefore these blessings themselves are, if you like, democratized. They don't belong to anyone. They don't belong to us.
Amen. So last question, and is there anybody, so if you have a question, please raise your hand. Anything? All right, so last question that I have would be, in your chapter on eschatology and culture, you explain the polarizing dichotomy of imperialism and fetishism, and you give French definitions to republicanism and democratic, postures and when it comes to politics, not necessarily the way that Americans use Democrat, Republican. So in what way does the biblical eschatology and transcultural gospel kind of breaks down this Democrat Republican view and leads us to a diagonalization of transcultural thinking? Help us so that we're not people who are led by our partisanship, but we're led by our principle, basically.
Oh, absolutely. This is something that I got from the Ghanaian theologian who was a professor at Yale Divinity School, Lamin Salmon, who wrote a book called Translating the Message about the history of the Bible. And Tim Keller talks a lot about that book in different things that he wrote as well. And what Sam points to is the way that the gospel, really quite uniquely among world religions, is just translatable right from the beginning. So, for example, Jesus spoke Aramaic, but the New Testament is written in Greek. So it's a translation right from the get-go. And the Bible is written in different languages. There's Hebrew in the Old Testament, Greek in the New Testament, a tiny bit of Aramaic. And so translation is built into Christianity right from the ground up. And therefore, when Christianity enters a culture, it doesn't try to remake that culture in the image of another culture. This is Simon's argument. And so he, writing as an African theologian, argues in that book that when Christianity takes root in a particular African culture, it makes the people more African, more fully and truly African than they were before. It doesn't try to erase their Africans. Whereas when modern Western culture engages with other cultures, it tries to make them secular, it tries to make them like itself, doesn't fulfill what they are already. And this is your 1 Corinthians 1:9. And so the way that I try to set that out in the book is that the Bible is neither monocultural, in the sense that if you become a Christian, you've got to conform to this one cultural expression. That's it. Absolutely not. But neither is it acultural, in the sense that you can express biblical truths without any cultural clothing. Because it's Hebrew culture that expresses God's truth, and then it's Greek language and Jewish culture in the New Testament. And so what we've got to try and get our heads around is the idea that the Bible can find its home in any culture, but as it does so, it transforms it
Amen.
and will challenge it at certain points, but makes that culture ever more itself. It doesn't deculturate it. It doesn't try and force it to become something else. It, just like Paul does with Greek wisdom, it shows it a fuller, richer version of itself that it can become.
Excellent. Excellent. Amen. The only alt I have with you as I look at your bookshelf, I don't see my books behind you.
These are my wife's books. You see a lot of books of international law, which is what she does behind me. My books are elsewhere, so I can promise you that I have it, I've read it, I read it, I recommend it.
So, quickly, we're going to end with this. Tell our audience on why they need your book, or just the understandings that the things that you're communicating and teaching.
Yeah. You need Bible, and to the extent that my book might give you a couple of pointers in bringing the rich wisdom of the Bible to bear on contemporary cultural issues, then if God chooses to bless it in that way, then I'm into that. What I'm seeking to do in the book is to help Christians find a posture in public debate today that puts people on the front foot. So we often find ourselves sort of besieged in public debate in the media today as Christians. But I want to show that the Bible sets forth a fresh and really often surprising vision for how Christians can contribute to really important public issues today, like the ones we'll be talking about in this conversation. And how if you let the Bible be itself, you often generate really insightful things to say about problems that affect everybody.
Amen. Can you guys please give it up for Christian? Amen.